Hello and welcome to this video lesson for CPI 111. In this lesson we are going to focus on learning a collection of really a large library of built-in functions that come with the GameMaker language that you can use to develop a fully fledged video game. These are going to be very useful functions that you can use as you move forward in creating your own games. Let me show you first where we're going to end up. Evil Clutches game. It's got a start menu. We come in and we've got a player that's moving up and down and can fire at the bad guys that are coming towards him. Your goal is to save these cute little dragons that are flying across the screen while avoiding getting hit by the bad guys that are shooting across, and also avoiding the occasional evil bad baby dragon that comes flying across and will temporarily freeze you. Okay, so that's where we're heading. I have put a starter project up on the course Blackboard site. It may or may not have this name. This is the name it has as we are starting this. So you'll want to go to the Blackboard site, search for the appropriate starter file, download it, and then open up GameMaker, create a new project, and then choose Import Project. Hunt down that file that you downloaded from the Blackboard site, and then that will land you with what we have here. I have already brought in all of the sprites that you're going to need. I've brought in a collection of sounds, and I've also created multiple rooms. Up till now we've only used a single room, so we'll have a discussion about how you work with multiple rooms in just a moment. And I have created a collection of objects already as well, and what I have done is arranged these objects into subfolders. In the earlier project we did in class, we just sort of threw everything under objects and sprites, but you can actually create subfolders. If I right-click here, then I can create a folder, which is they call a group inside GameMaker. And so if I come in, I can call it whatever I want. I'll just say bake. And then once I create that, it creates an empty group or an empty folder, and then I can assemble my objects into that folder. It's a way of keeping better organizational track of what you're doing, especially as your projects become bigger. So in this project, we've got different types of objects. We've got the critters, which we'll go through here in a little bit. We've got menu items. We're going to start working with creating menu items. And we've got a collection of controller objects. We've already worked with a single controller object in our Click the Clown game. Now, in this game, we're going to have multiple controller objects. Similarly, in this lesson, we're going to start working with scripts. In our earlier project, you were already writing GML code in order to make things happen in your Click the Clown game. We, of course, are going to be writing code here, but it's going to be a mixture of code that we write directly into the action window that is associated with a specific event, and standalone scripts that you can call from that action window associated with an event. So I'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. But if you go into the scripts group or scripts folder, you'll see that there are a collection of scripts already in here. They're already named, they've already been created, but they're all empty. So we'll go through and fill them up. All right. In our earlier project, we worked on a game in which the movement of the player, which was our clown, was essentially automatic. And the same thing when you created your Click the Fruit game for your first assignment. You created a collection of different objects that were flying around the screen without any need for the player to have those objects move. And they bounced off the wall and you could click on them. In this game, we're going to have the enemy character move on its own, similar to what we did in Click the Clown game, except now we're not going to have it bounce off the walls. We're going to have it move in a specific direction, and then when it reaches the edge of the room, it's going to turn around and come back the other direction. That will be its default movement. So we'll start with something that you sort of know, and we'll modify it a little bit. So go into the Objects folder and into Critters and open up obj_boss. Let's take a look at that. So here's our boss object. You can see we've got this sprite associated with it already. And I want to take a quick look at that sprite too. So I'll go open up the boss sprite. So let's look at this sprite. In our Click the Clown game, we did lots of work with importing already created sprites, and they were all single frame sprites. In this game, most of our sprites are going to be animated sprites that contain multiple frames. So if you look at this sprite here for the boss, if I click play, you'll see its little wings are animating, and the way that's working is that we have 4 frames for our sprite, and when we bring this sprite and attach it to an object and then bring an instance of that object into our room, by default, this sprite is going to play over and over and over and over again. So very quickly, very easily, you can have animated characters inside your game. Later, in upcoming games, we will use GML to control which of the frames we play. We'll control the speed of the animation, sometimes speeding it up, sometimes slowing it down, or even stopping it, or selecting sort of subsections of frames that we want to use. We'll even from time to time switch completely one sprite or set of sprites that's associated with an object with another sprite or set of sprites. But for now, we're keeping it relatively simple and just having an animated sprite that's already set up here for you. Also, a little bit later, I'll show you how to import sprite sheets that you can find online, which are collections of potentially lots of different frames for a sprite, and I'll show you how to break those up and bring them in so you can animate sprites pretty easily from pre-existing assets. All right. In this game, our origin point, which we dealt a lot with in the previous lesson, they're just all defaulted to the top left, and you don't have to do anything with them. I do encourage you to look through each of the sprites that's in here and see the little animations that go with most of them and how they're set up. But we're not going to play too much with them. Okay, back into our boss object. In our boss object, to start with, we want to, as I mentioned, build on what we did in the earlier game by having our boss move in a given direction as soon as it appears in the room. When we did this before, we just picked a random direction by using H speed and V speed. But we're going to do something slightly different here. In fact, what I want to do is in this game, we're going to have the boss that's going to be moving on its own in a given direction at a given speed. We're also going to have baby dragons. They're going to be moving in a similar fashion, going from the right side of the screen to the left side. We're going to have evil baby dragons doing the same thing, and we're going to have demons that are going to be moving across the screen. Oh, and we're going to have fireballs that our player is going to shoot out to protect itself from the demons, and those fireballs are going to be moving in a certain direction at a certain speed. So we're going to have really a number of different objects that are all going to need to move on their own at a given speed in a given direction. And when you're creating a game or any software and you've got multiple different elements within that game that are going to be performing similar actions, In cases like that, it's a good idea to create a script that you can use, a single script which can be used by multiple different objects. For one thing, this saves you from having to retype the whole script over and over and over again for each one of the objects individually. For another thing, you can pass in information, arguments, to the script that will allow you to easily modify the way that the action or script works for each of the objects with which you want to associate it. All right, so let's do that here. We're going to create a kind of a utility script for movement in a certain direction. So we'll leave our boss object out here, and we'll come back to the scripts section, and you'll see in here there's a section, a folder called utilities. So if I open that up, there's a script that's already been created in there called set direction speed. Let me show you quickly how you can create a new script if you're going to create one from scratch. To do so, you can do like you've done for everything else. You can right-click out in your workspace, choose Resources, and then choose Create Script. Or from your resources list, you can right-click and then choose Create Script. We'll do that here. Then what you'll get is a window that looks just like the action window that we've been working with all along. And you can begin to type in your script. The only difference with this one versus the ones we've been working with before is that you can also name, just like when we name sprites or name objects, you can name this script, and in fact you should. When naming a script in GameMaker, use something descriptive to help you understand what it is that's happening inside that script. The default way or convention to name scripts in GameMaker is to use words separated by these underscores. You can also use camel case, which is a common way to name scripts, where you start off with a lowercase name at the beginning, and then you use an uppercase with no underscore for the next word, and then another uppercase for the next word. And you can also name them with the capital letter to start with, and then capital letters for each individual word, which would be similar to something like, oh, I don't know, C or C sharp, something like that. Okay. So we don't actually need this script. I just wanted to show you how to create one if you were going to create your own new one. But in our case, we already have one, and I've named it Set Direction Speed, since that's what it's going to do. All right, so in our earlier assignment, we worked with some built-in variables, one of which was direction. And we used direction in our earlier assignment in order to rotate the clown's head around so that it was pointing the way that it was moving. Well, we're going to use it here too. So for now, I'm just going to put in the word direction. And we're going to use another built-in variable, which is called speed. Now, before we didn't use speed so much because instead we used the combination of h speed and v speed, which produced the ultimate speed at which the object moved, our clown head, and our fruit and our bombs for the click the fruit activity. But here we'll just set it using speed and then tell it which direction we want it to go. Now, one way to use this would be to just set a specific direction. And you'll remember that the way direction numbers work in GameMaker is think of a circle 360 degrees with 0 degrees pointing toward the right-hand side where 3 would be on a clock, and then rotating counterclockwise around the circle. So facing straight up is 90, straight left is 180, straight down is 270, and so on. So we could just pick something like direction equals 0, and that would cause whatever object the script gets attached to move toward the right. But we don't want to do a hard-coded number. Instead, we want to be able to have a different number for each object that this script is attached to. The way we can do that is that we can make use of arguments. In GameMaker, when you write a script, and then call that script from some object, you can feed the script arguments with values associated with those arguments, and the script will then read in those arguments and make use of them in some way. So you can see when I type this in, I got this, the green color, which is indicating this is a built-in variable inside GameMaker. I'll show you how we use these in just a minute. We're going to do the same thing with speed. We're going to pass in a value that will then be stored in this built-in speed variable. Right? And that's all there is to it. If I'd like to help myself later on, I can put in a comment. It's always a good idea to put in a comment to let other people who may be working on your project understand what it is you're doing. I can type in the name of the script, which is also going to be the name of the function, and then tell it what information goes with each of these arguments, or what's going to be stored in each of the arguments. Okay, so we'll save that. Now, how do we make use of this utility script from our boss object? Well, we'll come back into it, go to our create event, and now what I want to do is basically call that function that I just wrote. So if I start to type it in, you'll see, boom, there it is. Now it's expecting me to pass it some information, and if you remember, the information it's expecting me to pass is the direction and the speed. So for the direction, we're going to have our dragon start by moving straight up the screen. So we'll say 90. And then for a speed, let's say, oh, I don't know, 5. And we can play around with these values later if we think, well, we can play around with the speed at least. If we think it's too slow or too fast, then we can mess with it. Okay. Let's see what this looks like. Close that up, hit play. You should know what's going to happen now. So we start off here, and then we go in, and there goes our guy, and he escapes the room, and he's gone. So it's working, and we're able to get our boss character moving straight up the screen. I actually think that's too slow. I'd like it to be faster, so I'll change it to 8. But we need our guy to then turn around when he hits the edge of the room and reverse direction, and then when he goes down to the bottom of the screen, reverse direction again. And we're going to want our boss eventually to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So there are a couple of ways to do this as well. We only have one boss in our game, and so we probably could just type our script straight into the action window here. But I'm sort of having you practice working with scripts, so we might as well work with a script. So I'm going to come into our scripts and go into the one that's called boss step. See, we're working with the step event, and this is our boss, so I called it boss step. And let's have our boss flip direction when it when it needs to, basically. It's kind of simple for now, but it's going to end up needing to do a lot of other things eventually. All right, so how do we make this work? Well, let's think about it this way. If the boss object is moving up towards the top of the screen, as it moves, its Y position is continuously getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And eventually its Y position is going to be less than 0. And if you think about the dimensions of the room, a Y of less than 0 means that the object is then outside the bounds of the room. It's not quite as simple as that. You do need to take into account where the origin point is on the sprite that's associated with the object. And our origin point, if you remember, is at 0, 0. It's in the upper left-hand corner of our boss. So it actually works really well. if it's moving up towards the top of the screen and y hits 0, it means the top of our boss image has hit the edge of the room, and it's at that point that we'd like it to move around, to turn around. So if we want to check something like that in a step event, we want to use an if statement, right? So if y, if the y position of the boss is less than 0, you could use equal or less than 0, but this is close enough, then we want to do something. Well, we've been playing with direction already, and you'll remember what direction it is to be going south, or down screen, I guess I should say. It's 270 degrees. But we want to get trickier here. We want to be able to have one script take care of the movement of our boss when it hits the top of the screen, which is what we're doing now, and when it hits the bottom of the screen. So how can we do that? Well, this is a little tricky. What we can do is take whatever the current direction is. So when it first starts, the direction is going to be 90 degrees, and we are going to add 180 degrees to that. So if we take 90 and we add 180, our new direction is going to be 270, which means we're going to be going down screen. Then if we hit the bottom of the screen, now we're at 270, and we add 180 to that, it's a little confusing, but GameMaker will automatically revert back to being 90 degrees. It'll take 270 plus 180, realize that's more than 360, and then bring it back to 90. It's kind of a weird hack. Right? So if we want to use this if statement, but we want to check to see if the y position of our boss is less than 0, meaning it's at the top of the screen, or if it's the bottom of the screen, in either case we want to switch directions, then we're going to use this little symbol, which means or, and we're going to check for something else. If y is greater than what? Greater than room height. We've used room width and height before, I think. This is a built-in variable that tells you how tall or how wide a given room is in pixels, minus what? Minus sprite height. Okay. So remember that our origin point is at the upper left-hand corner of our sprite. So if we just said room height, it would disappear all the way off the bottom of the room before it would flip around. So we want to take room height minus sprite height. Right? Then switch the direction. Okay. See if that really works. Let's go back to our boss object. Commit to the step event, and now we'll call this script, boss step, and we're not passing it anything at the moment. And let's see if we did that right or not. Hits the top, comes down, boom, hits the bottom, hits the top, hits the bottom, and endlessly moves up and down the screen.